What happens when a beloved late-night host crosses the line with royalty? You won't believe what unfolds when Prince Harry sits down for what was supposed to be a light-hearted interview, but quickly spirals into television's most explosive confrontation of the year. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife, and by the end, one of them would storm off the set, leaving viewers stunned and social media ablaze. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because you're not going to believe what unfolds when two worlds collide in the most dramatic way possible. Last night's episode of The Late Show started like any other. The familiar blue backdrop, the energetic band, and Stephen Colbert's trademark grin as he introduced his guest. Prince Harry walked onto the stage with his usual composed demeanor, waving to the enthusiastic audience who welcomed him with thunderous applause. He settled into the guest chair, adjusting his suit jacket with the practiced ease of someone who had done countless interviews over the years. "Prince Harry, welcome back to The Late Show," Colbert began, his voice carrying that familiar blend of charm and mischief that had made him a household name. "It's always a pleasure to have actual royalty on the show, though I have to ask, do I need to bow, or can we just do the regular handshake thing?" The audience chuckled, and Harry smiled politely. "The handshake works just fine, Stephen. I'm not really one for all the formal protocol these days." Right. Colbert nodded, leaning back in his chair with an expression that seemed innocent enough. "Speaking of protocol, I've been reading your book again. Spare, fascinating stuff. Really pulls back the curtain on what it's like behind palace doors." Harry's smile remained, but there was a slight tension in his shoulders. "Yes, well, I felt it was important to tell my side of the story, to be honest about my experiences." "Honest," Colbert repeated, drawing out the word as if tasting it. "That's interesting, because I have to say, some of the things you wrote about your family, about your father, about William, it's pretty heavy stuff. Makes me wonder how your grandmother would have felt about all those revelations." The temperature in the studio seemed to drop a few degrees. Harry's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his media training kicked in. "My grandmother understood the importance of truth, Stephen. She lived through her own share of family difficulties that played out in the public eye." "Did she, though?" Colbert pressed, his tone shifting subtly from playful to pointed. "Because from what I understand, the Queen was pretty big on duty, loyalty, keeping family business private. The whole never complain, never explain thing. That was kind of her motto, wasn't it?" The audience, sensing the shift in energy, fell silent. Harry shifted in his seat, his hands clasping together. "My grandmother was a remarkable woman who understood that sometimes staying silent can be more harmful than speaking up. She supported my decision to prioritize my mental health and my family's well-being." "Right, your mental health," Colbert nodded, but there was something calculated in his expression now, and I'm sure everyone sympathizes with that struggle. "But here's what I'm curious about. You talk a lot about wanting privacy, wanting to protect your family from media intrusion. Yet here you are, on book tours, Netflix documentaries, podcasts, late-night shows. It's a little contradictory, don't you think?" Harry's composure was beginning to crack. "Stephen, there's a difference between choosing when and how to share your story and having it twisted and exploited by tabloids who don't care about the truth." "Is there, though?" Colbert leaned forward, his voice taking on that sharp edge that political figures knew all too well. "Because it seems to me like you're pretty selective about what privacy means. You want privacy from certain media outlets, but you're happy to spill family secrets to the ones that pay you well enough." The studio fell dead silent. Harry's face had gone rigid, his eyes flashing with something dangerous. "I think you're misunderstanding the situation entirely." "I." Colbert's grin had turned predatory. "Because I've got to be honest with you, Harry, and I know you appreciate honesty. A lot of Americans are watching this whole thing and thinking, here's a guy who was born into unimaginable privilege, who never had to worry about paying rent or student loans or health care, complaining about how hard his life is. It's a tough sell." Harry's hands were gripping the arms of his chair now. "You have absolutely no idea what you're talking about, don't I?" Colbert continued, seemingly oblivious to the warning signs. "I mean, your brother's going to be king someday. Your father is the current king. You grew up in palaces. And your big complaint is that you weren't getting enough attention? That you were the spare? Come on, man. Read the room." The transformation in Harry was visible. His shoulders squared, His spine straightened, and when he spoke, his voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone who had been raised to command respect. Stephen, I think you need to be very careful about how you choose to proceed with this conversation. But Colbert, perhaps drunk on the adrenaline of the moment or simply convinced of his own righteousness, pressed on. Careful? Why? Because you're a prince? Because I'm supposed to be intimidated by a title you were born with? This is America, Harry. We threw off the monarchy thing a while back. Here, you're just another celebrity with daddy issues. The words hung in the air like a slap. Harry's face had gone white, then red, his breath coming in controlled but visible patterns. The audience was frozen, unsure whether they were witnessing masterful television or a career-ending mistake. You know what, Stephen? Harry's voice was quiet now, dangerously quiet. I came here tonight because I thought we could have a reasonable conversation about important issues. About mental health, about service, about making a positive difference in the world. But instead, you've chosen to ambush me with cheap shots and tabloid talking points. Colbert, perhaps realizing he had pushed too far, but unable to back down, now doubled down instead. Ambush. This is a talk show, not a therapy session. If you can't handle a few tough questions about your very public complaints about your very privileged life, maybe you shouldn't be writing tell-all books and giving interviews in the first place. The words seemed to echo in the sudden silence that followed, and in that moment, everyone in the studio knew that something irreversible had just happened. The careful balance between host and guest, between entertainment and respect, had been shattered completely. Harry stood up slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled, but his eyes were blazing with an anger that seemed to fill the entire studio. When he spoke, his voice carried centuries of royal authority, but also something much more personal and raw. You want to talk about privilege, Stephen? Let's talk about privilege. Harry's voice cut through the silence like a blade. You sit here, night after night, making millions of dollars mocking people you've never met, tearing down individuals who can't fight back, all while your audience applauds your cruelty. And you have the audacity to lecture me about privilege? Colbert's face had gone pale, but his ego wouldn't let him retreat. Oh, so now I'm the bad guy for asking legitimate questions? For holding you accountable for your choices? Accountable? Harry's laugh was bitter, almost frightening in its intensity. You want to hold me accountable? Fine. Let's start with you. How many nights have you sat in that chair, Stephen, making jokes about my mother's death? About the car crash that killed her while she was being chased by the same type of photographers you seem to think have every right to invade our privacy. The studio had become a tomb. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate, their operators unsure whether they should keep rolling. Colbert's mouth opened, then closed, no words coming out. That's what I thought, Harry continued, his voice gaining strength. With each word, you want to talk about reading the room? Let me read it for you. You're a middle-aged man who makes his living by punching down at people who've suffered real trauma, real loss, and you've convinced yourself that it's noble because you wrap it in political commentary and clever wordplay. Colbert finally found his voice, but it came out strained. Harry, I think you're taking this a little too personally. Too personally? Harry's voice rose, the royal composure finally cracking completely. My mother died when I was 12 years old, Stephen. 12. Do you have children? Can you imagine what it would be like for them to grow up knowing that their mother's last moments were spent in terror, being hunted like an animal by people who wanted to sell photographs of her pain? The audience was frozen, some people covering their mouths in shock. This had gone far beyond awkward television into something raw and devastating. And you want to know about privilege? Harry continued, his voice breaking slightly. My privilege was walking behind her coffin while the world watched. My privilege was having to shake hands with the very people who contributed to her death, having to smile and be polite while inside I was screaming. My privilege was spending years in therapy trying to process trauma that you people turn into punchlines. Colbert was visibly sweating now, realizing the magnitude of his miscalculation, but his pride kept him from backing down completely. Look, I'm sorry about your mother, but that doesn't give you a free pass to a free pass. Harry's voice was incredulous. A free pass to what exactly? To try to build a life away from the system that destroyed my family? To try to protect my wife and children from the same fate? You think this is easy for me? You think I wanted to leave everything I knew, everyone I loved, to start over in a foreign country? The raw pain in Harry's voice was evident to everyone in the room. This wasn't an entitled prince throwing a tantrum anymore. This was a man whose deepest wounds had been torn open on national television. Stephen, you sit there in your comfortable chair, in your safe little bubble, making jokes about things you know nothing about. You've never had your every move scrutinized, your every relationship dissected, your grief turned into tabloid headlines. You've never had to worry about whether your wife might end up like your mother, whether your children will grow up hunted by cameras and lies. Colbert tried to regain control of the situation. Harry, I understand you're upset, but this is exactly what I'm talking about. You're proving my point. You can't handle criticism. You can't handle people disagreeing with you. The words were like gasoline on a fire. Harry's face contorted with rage. Criticism? You call that criticism? You ambushed me with tabloid talking, points and personal attacks, then acted like I should be grateful for the privilege of being insulted on your show. I asked you legitimate questions about your public statements. Colbert shot back, his own composure finally cracking. If you put your life out there for public consumption, you don't get to pick and choose which questions you answer. Public consumption? Harry's voice rose to nearly a shout. My life isn't a product for your entertainment, Stephen. I'm not here for your amusement or your ratings. I'm a human being who's been through hell, and I came here tonight thinking I could have an honest conversation about important issues. Instead, I get attacked by someone who's clearly never faced a real challenge in his life. The studio erupted in uncomfortable murmurs. Some audience members were starting to leave their seats, unable to watch the train wreck unfolding before them. Never faced a challenge. Colbert's voice was rising now too, his professional mask slipping completely. You don't know anything about my life, Harry. I've worked for everything I have. I wasn't born into a palace with servants and trust funds. And I wasn't born asking for any of that. Harry roared back. You think I chose to be born into that? Family? You think I chose to have my entire life mapped out before I could even walk? You think I chose to lose my mother at 12 and then spend the rest of my childhood being told to smile and wave while inside I was dying? The confrontation had reached a fever pitch. Both men were standing now, facing each other across the coffee table that suddenly seemed like a battlefield. The audience was dead silent, witnesses to something that felt more like a psychological breakdown than entertainment. You know what your real problem is, Stephen? Harry's voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper. You're a bully. You hide behind your desk and your writers and your applause. But at the end of the day, you're just a bully who gets off on hurting people who can't fight back. And tonight, you picked the wrong target. Colbert's face was red with anger and embarrassment. I'm a bully? You're the one having a meltdown because someone dared to ask you tough questions. This is exactly the problem with people like you. You think you're above accountability. People like me? Harry's voice was lethal now. What exactly do you mean by that, Stephen? Please, enlighten us all about what kind of person you think I am. The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon, and everyone in the studio knew that whatever Colbert said next would determine whether this confrontation would end or explode into something even more devastating. The host's next words would either defuse the situation or push it past the point of no return, and from the look in his eyes, it was clear that Stephen Colbert was about to make a choice that would change everything. Colbert's face twisted with a mixture of rage and desperation. He had backed himself into a corner, and instead of finding grace, he chose to go down swinging. You want to know what I mean by people like you? I mean entitled, whining, privileged. Brats who think the world owes them something because they've had a hard time. I mean people who abandon their families, their duties, their countries, and then expect everyone to feel sorry for them. The words hit the studio like a physical blow. The gasps from the audience were audible, and several crew members visibly winced. Harry's face went completely white, then flushed deep red, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. You think you're the only person who's lost someone, Harry. Colbert continued, his voice rising to match Harry's earlier fury. You think you're the only one who's suffered? Welcome to the human race. The difference is, most people don't write books about it and go on international publicity tours crying about how unfair life is. Harry was trembling now, not with fear, but with enrage so pure and focused it seemed to radiate from him like heat. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried more menace than any shout could have. "Stephen," he said, slowly, each word precise and deadly, "you have just made the biggest mistake of your career." The studio fell into complete silence. Even the camera operators seemed to hold their breath. Harry took a step closer to Colbert's desk, his movements controlled but predatory. "You want to talk about abandoning family? Let me tell you about family, Stephen. Family is supposed to protect each other. Family is supposed to stand together against people like you. People who make their living by destroying others for sport. But my family." Harry's voice cracked with pain and fury. "My family fed me to the wolves to protect themselves. They leaked stories about me, about my wife, about my children, to save their own reputations." Colbert opened his mouth to respond, but Harry held up a hand that somehow commanded absolute silence. "You think I abandoned my duty? My duty was to my wife and children first, not to an institution that would sacrifice me to protect a system that killed my mother. You think I'm whining? I'm fighting. I'm fighting for my family's safety, for their privacy, for their right to exist without being hunted by the same predators that destroyed my mother." The raw emotion in Harry's voice was overwhelming. Several audience members were openly crying, and even some of the crew had tears in their eyes. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was witnessing someone's soul being laid bare on national television. "And you, Stephen," Harry continued, his voice gaining strength with each word, "you represent everything that's wrong with this system. You sit in your ivory tower, making millions by mocking people's pain, by turning tragedy into punchlines, by reducing human suffering to material for your monologue. You're no different from the tabloid photographers who chased my mother to her death." Colbert's face had gone ashen. He tried to speak, but Harry wasn't finished. "You want to know what real privilege looks like? It's sitting in that chair, night after night, destroying people's reputations and lives for applause, and never having to face any real consequences for your actions. It's being able to attack anyone you want while hiding behind the pretense of comedy and social commentary." Harry's voice rose again, filling every corner of the studio. "But here's what you've forgotten, Stephen. I may be a prince, but I'm also a soldier. I've served my country in war zones. I've seen real courage and real sacrifice, and I know the difference between a warrior and a coward. And you, sir, are a coward." The word coward seemed to echo in the studio like a gunshot. Colbert's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no words came out. He had been completely, utterly destroyed, and everyone in the room knew it. "You attack people who can't fight back. You mock pain you've never experienced, and you hide behind your audience's laughter like it somehow justifies your cruelty. But when someone finally stands up to you, when someone finally calls you out for what you really are, you crumble." Harry straightened to his full height, and in that moment, every inch of his royal breeding was visible. He wasn't just a man anymore. He was centuries of monarchy, of command, of absolute authority. "I came here tonight hoping to have a meaningful conversation about mental health, about service, about making the world a better place. Instead, I've been subjected to an ambush by a man who clearly has no understanding of basic human decency or professional respect." The studio was so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning was audible. Harry looked directly into the main camera, addressing not just the studio audience, but the millions watching at home. "To everyone watching, I want you to see what just happened here. This is what passes for journalism in America today. This is what your media considers entertainment: attacking a guest's dead mother, mocking their trauma, and then acting surprised when they defend themselves." He turned back to Colbert, who was still sitting in stunned silence behind his desk. "And you, Stephen, you should be ashamed of yourself. You've disgraced not just your profession, but your network, your audience, and your own integrity." Harry began walking toward the edge of the stage, but then stopped and turned back one final time. "Oh, and Stephen, when the ratings come in tomorrow, when the clips of this disaster are trending on every social media platform, when your advertisers start pulling out and your bosses start asking questions, I want you to remember something." He paused, letting the moment stretch until it was almost unbearable. "You did this to yourself. Every single consequence that comes from tonight is because you chose to be cruel instead of kind, because you chose to attack instead of engage, because you chose to be a bully instead of a host. You had a chance to have a real conversation with someone who's been through hell and survived, and instead, you chose to try to drag me down to your level. Harry's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the studio. But I'm not going to let you drag me down. Stephen, I'm better than that. My family is better than that. And frankly, your audience deserves better than that. With that, Prince Harry turned and walked off the stage, his posture straight and dignified despite the chaos he was leaving behind. The studio remained in complete silence until his footsteps could no longer be heard, and then the whispers began. First from the audience, then from the crew, building into a low buzz of shock and disbelief. Colbert sat frozen behind his desk, his face a mask of horror and humiliation. The cameras were still rolling, capturing every moment of his disgrace, but he seemed unable to move or speak. His career, his reputation, everything he had built over decades of television had just been demolished in a matter of minutes by a man he had tried to ambush and humiliate. The show cut to commercial break, but the damage was already done. In those 25 minutes of television, the world had witnessed not just a celebrity meltdown, but a complete reversal of power, a masterclass in dignity under attack, and the spectacular downfall of a host who had finally picked on the wrong guest. Prince Harry had walked into that studio as a target and walked out as a conqueror, leaving behind the wreckage of Stephen Colbert's reputation and the most shocking moment in late-night television history.